Welcome back to the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I am one of your hosts, and today I'm here with my co-host, Leb Tannenbaum. Good afternoon.
Hi there.
How are you?
I could be. I'm a little congested and cold, but
I love the weather.
I'm here. I'm present, and I'm happy to be here.
Yes. So I'm actually really happy that Leb is here. So to our listener, if Leb sounds a little under the weather or seems a little lower energy today, he is pushing through because the show must go on. So dealing with, I guess, the seasonal stuff here out in the Pacific Northwest. Anyway, let's get to today's episode. So today's episode is actually, it's just us. Our colleague, Patsy Feeman, who's normally here, is on vacation this week. So Patsy, we hope you're having a fantastic time. She will be back. She'll be back in time for our next episode. But today's topic comes from a survey that we posted to a large CEO group on LinkedIn. We specifically asked, basically, to ask this group, since our goal here at the Frustrated CEO is to address the topics that are keeping CEOs awake at night. The question to that CEO group was, what's keeping you awake at night? What topics would you want us to cover? And we threw out a number of hot topics like the war on talent right now. That's a big one. Issues potentially with execution, issues affecting execution within the business, a number of other things. But the one topic that carried more than 60% of the votes was fixing dysfunctional culture. Bit of a surprise to us. This is a topic that we're obviously passionate about, but it was surprising to hear that you, the CEO on the other end of this experience, is also equally passionate about fixing dysfunctional culture. Now, Leb, in preparation for today, you have a problem with using the word dysfunctional, right?
Well, yeah, a little bit, because culture, it basically, it is what it is, and it's a discovery to find out and baseline it and find out exactly what is going on. But dysfunctional is used a lot and is often a label that isn't welcomed, which can actually inhibit the journey to a great culture. Right? When we do culture survey work or help with the laying out of a baseline, we often even stay away from good and bad, right? Because, if it's good, then, whatever that, emotion is, comes along. And then if it's bad, it's like, okay, well, maybe I don't want to deal with that. And maybe that's part of the problem. But at any rate, culture is culture. Look, any organization, whether they're intentional or by default, they have a culture.
Right.
We it's undeniable. So every organization, every team, every dance company, everywhere you look, there's a culture. And with that in mind, we're here to start to talk about, well, what is culture?
Yeah. So I'm going to put you on the spot because you used the word team, and I know that you're a big sports fan. I am too. A lot of our listeners are. When we talk about culture and the impact on teams, what are some of take this outside of the business space and take it to some sports teams that I know you. I know you have these in your hip pocket. What are some of the pick a team that maybe had a lot of talent, that had not a bad culture, but where the culture didn't facilitate that team achieving its potential, versus another team that you can think of, something you got where maybe the opposite was true.
Well, one comes to mind. I'm sorry for anybody in Southern California, but having been a graduate of Oregon State University, the Oregon State football team, had basically a losing record for a really long time. And you'll find this is true. One of the things, if you really follow any kind of sport, is when there is a head coaching change, one of the first things that's talked about is we're going to change the culture here.
That's true. 100%.
Right?
Every
So,
time.
every time, right? So they bring in Jonathan Smith for the Oregon State Beavers. And what's fascinating, and I think pertinent to, our listeners, is it's a journey. So you don't come in and change the culture overnight.
Right.
So this is his 4th year. And he's announced kind of the team has turned some kind of a culture corner.
Mm.
And they've won 3 and lost 1, and they just beat USC on Saturday pretty solidly. And so now they have to recognize and begin to deal with, so how do you up level a winning team or a winning culture, right? Okay, near and dear to anybody who's around Portland, the Portland Trailblazers. There's no doubt that our coach was a good coach.
Mm.
There's no doubt that it was a good culture. And we were basically a good winning team, but we could never get over the hump. So some people have referred to that we plateaued, the culture and the performance. And there is a relationship between culture and performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is really why maybe some of our CEOs get frustrated or say, this is a hot topic for me, because there's this relationship between culture and performance. And you can have a good culture, but what I think people are really aiming for is, how do I create a great culture? And how do I, all the other things that go along with that. So yes, turning to sports. And the other thing I think that's really fun is there's a culture, I think, in sports that doesn't get talked about very much, which is the culture of rooting for the underdog. Right. And I know for myself, I mean, there's plenty of times I've watched an underdog look like they're going to rise up and win a championship of some kind. And
Sure.
unless I'm really in favor of, the strong, like the Alabama football team, I'm probably rooting for the underdog, even if I don't know that much about them. So they create a culture. And some of that culture can be, I'm playing with a chip on my shoulder. I'm an underdog. And if it works for you, it won't last forever, because at some point in time you won't be that underdog. Gonzaga basketball has a lot. They are a small school, Jesuit school in Spokane, Washington, and now they're a perennial. Every year, 20 years in a row, they're in the NCAA. They're in a basketball tournament and they go far.
Right.
So all that to be said, I think it's a great question, and I would stay away from dysfunction. I would stay away from good or bad, but I would recognize that ultimately the goal might be great.
Yeah. I had a few thoughts. One, you talked about rooting for the underdog. Actually, and I was thinking this yesterday. I'm a big sports fan like you. I was watching some NFL games, and for whatever reason, I was just thinking about how there are some teams that, when they were underdogs, they are easy to root for. But then when they string a few seasons together of success, and now they've taken the role of the powerhouse or the consistent winner, then suddenly they become fun to root against. And so, tying that back to business, constantly, to your point, the underdog, you can only ring that bell for so long. And your culture is always evolving and always changing. And so tapping into that. So that's interesting. I thought you were going to talk about the early 2000, I think early 2000, the what are I don't know if it's affectionately referred to as the Jailblazers or
Culture got
unaffectionately referred to as the Jailblazers, but just a team that had a lot of talent and yet could never put it together. They seemed to be pulling in different directions, and didn't.
Well, having lived in Portland for over 35 years, I think that and before we get into kind of what is culture, I think the learning there was, it's not just about talent. So we hired for talent and ignored character.
Yeah.
We hired for talent and ignored some, what might in business would be referred to as working with our core values.
Right.
And we had the talent, and they were pretty unmanageable, pretty uncoachable, and the culture went bad, and uh, embarrassingly bad,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so therefore they got a new name. For a while, they were the Portland Jailblazers.
Mhm.
And when a player chokes the coach, it's going to hit national news.
I was living on the East Coast during that time, and it was a joke. It was, usually on the East Coast, it seemed like our media was only concerned about East Coast teams, but nope, we would hear about whatever's going on with the latest in the Jailblazer saga. And but I think so you make a good point that it's not always about talent, character, and let's bring it back to the business. That's obviously important for you, the CEO. Um, if you've got great talent and there's not an emphasis on the values, living the values, how we treat each other, how we show up every day. Well, I think one of the things I've learned is nothing will make your top talent leave faster than unmanaged poor performance or poor behavior in the organization. It's incredibly disheartening, disengaging when I'm trying to bring my best self every day. I'm trying to, I'm going above and beyond, and I see either unmanaged poor behavior, like people are allowed to be jerks, and they're getting in the way of each other and me and my desire to bring my best, or just those chronic. It could be poor performance, but those are culture impacts, and then you end up losing as a frustrated CEO, you end up losing the people that you really want to keep because your good talent can leave and go someplace else.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm just noticing we just used culture gone bad. So I used the bands label.
I did too.
And the Jailblazers, I mean, it was dysfunctional, but that's more of an exception than what we're here to talk about, which is,
Right.
the journey to greatness. But, let's begin. Let's talk about, so what is culture?
What is culture? It's a
Right?
great
It's a hot
question.
topic. At one point, it wasn't even talked about. Now it's talked about regularly.
Mhm.
And, I think one of the things that I've heard people say, and I'm aligned with that, is it's a set of commonly held beliefs. But then, you have to recognize whether those beliefs can ever change, because they do. The beliefs have a great impact on what is a culture,
Mhm.
and what is culture for, an organization. Um, so I'll toss it back to you, and we'll just go back and forth and talk about. So what is this thing that everybody's talking about?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've learned over the last handful of years is I think as more focus and attention has been given to culture, um, is and maybe so I'm answering the question in what is culture. I can tell you what it isn't. It isn't just employee engagement. It's not just do I have happy
Mhm.
people.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important distinction. It was a great learning and insight for me, and it's a great. It's often encouraging to share that with an executive, with a CEO, with a senior leader, who I remember in the early days of culture talking to them, and there were plenty of leaders who would say, I pay them and therefore they should be happy. And that may have worked years ago. That talk about beliefs, right? If that's a belief, then I'm going to manage my people that way. I'm not necessarily
Mhm.
going to worry about are they happy? I'm just going to keep paying them and assume that they're happy. But when you understand that culture is more than just employee happiness or employee engagement, it's more than just the people component. Then it opens up. First of all, it sets the stage for a much broader conversation about how you can impact your culture, and I think it takes the conversation away from I just have to make my people happy to more business strategies and actual business ideas that you can implement that yes, hopefully if you do it right, will make a difference in employee happiness, but will also impact your customers. It's also going to impact your productivity and your efficiency as an organization. It will have a greater ROI trickling down from the top line to the bottom line. It creates a more cohesive leadership team. It breaks down the silos in the organization. It goes far beyond just happiness when you understand all the different components of culture.
Right. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I've heard some people refer to it as our culture is our personality. It's our character on display. And one of the things that I think is harder for, as an example, organizations who have multiple locations and maybe a headquarters, is sometimes there are multiple personalities,
Yes.
right? And maybe a new CEO will come in and say, "Well, how do I unify this?" When headquarters is kind of the hub, or and but we have really important people in really important places, in other parts of the country.
Right.
So if it's about the personality that's on display, the character that's on display, that's a really important component. And again, there's going to be more to it, right? When we're talking about culture,
Right.
and Dan Dennison, who is a recognized global thought leader that we've worked with for over 20 years, when he was asked to, okay, Dan, you've got all this data, you've been doing this work for a really long time. If you had to boil the ocean, what would you say culture is? And his comment was, it's the way we do things around here.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the culture is. And it sounds simplistic, and it is in some ways, but it's also provocative because it has you stop and take a look at. So what does that mean? How are we doing it? How intentional are we about certain things? And are we overly focused on one thing?
Mm.
Right. How do we treat each other? I mean, that's also a cultural question, and a component of culture.
Right.
How do we treat each other?
Yeah.
How do we celebrate? All of those kinds of things come up.
Yeah. What is our natural inclination? Do we tend to work better in teams? Do we tend to work better individually? Do we work in silos? Do we share information across the organization? Do we celebrate our failures and our successes?
Right.
So all of that.
Yeah. Is it okay to make a mistake? Is it okay do we learn from our mistakes? Right. Do we have core values that are alive and well, or
That's a huge one.
are they, inscribed on a wall, and so there they live? It's incredibly important. And here's another piece from the data that Dennison has collected, is that leaders have this is data verified. Leaders have the greatest impact on an organization's culture.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean to you, CEO, as a leader? Maybe some of the frustration is being caused by you and your leadership team, but it hasn't really been, examined. I've had one leader tell me it's the leadership landscape. That's what culture is. So are we making things beautiful, or do we have a haphazard, random? If you think of a landscape in front of a nice house, well, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What function does everything, all the plants have in making this yard beautiful or not? And leaders, I mean, I think the other thing that we can't ignore is that we have never been in a worldly, chaotic, more culture in my lifetime. So what is the pressure? What is the impact? How does a culture adjust? How flexible, adaptive, willing to let go of a belief? And obviously, one of those challenges, we'll get into it more a little later, is around, in office, remote, impact on collaboration.
Yeah.
And what are what are your talented people saying?
Right.
Right.
And that reminds me of, and I don't remember where I heard this, but it's always stuck with me. And that is, he said, "What are your talented people saying?" The saying is, "Culture lives in the stories that people tell."
Hmm. Yeah.
Right. So I think that, to me, uh, I feel like you could walk into any company and hang out at the water cooler, or on the, if it's a virtual, hang out in the chat rooms, and within a relatively short period of time, whether it's a few hours or a few days, just by talking to the people, just by listening to the stories, you get a good sense of the culture. Is it
Hmm.
collaborative? Is it empowering? Is it top down? Is it bottom up? Is it somewhere in the middle? Um, do people feel like they have the tools that they need to do the jobs that they're being asked to do? Do they have the authority? If they've got the tools to do the job, but they aren't given the authority, that's frustrating. If they have the authority but not the tools, that's frustrating. Do they have clarity and direction and alignment? I talked earlier, I mentioned that culture is so much more than just employee engagement. There's this whole component of organization culture, and this is very specific to you, the listener. There's this component of culture that absolutely emanates from and is the responsibility of you and your executive team, and that is, are you casting a compelling vision? Are you able to, as one cohesive team, create a path, something out on the horizon that excites me and the rest of the people who work here, that we're clear about where we're going, we're clear about why we can't stay where we are today, we're clear about how you're going to lead us there, and this is just as important, we're clear that you and your whole leadership team is aligned on that vision. And I think that's one of the things, I used to, when working with a client, the goal, especially that end of year or beginning of year time, was to create a strategic plan, right? Are they coming to get you, Love?
It's not that bad.
I think they're coming to get you. And by the way, anybody who's listening in their car it just got done looking in the rearview mirror to see if they have to pull over. So, but the goal so often for so many companies is to create a strategic plan, right? You want that 3 to 5 year vision. You want to know, we get together to create our goals for the next 12 months, our quarterly rocks, and yet we leave the room with this document or this plan. So we've checked that box, but what we don't have is leadership alignment. And the alignment is just as important. And so culture, here's how that plays back to culture. What I mean by leadership alignment is, during the course of creating that plan or that vision, we've all said what needed to be said. It was safe for everybody to throw out differing viewpoints. It was safe for somebody to say, I don't agree with that direction, and that's the most important priority. And we managed through that. We navigated through that together as a team. And at the end of the day, no one's leaving this room not fully aligned and committed to the plan. Without leadership alignment, you think you have a vision, you think you have a plan, and you communicate that down into the organization. And then as you start to try to implement it or execute it, you realize, well, this person really wasn't on board with that, and this person didn't buy into that, or and that absolutely has an impact on your culture.
Mhm.
If the leadership team is not aligned on that vision and that direction and on that plan and what our priorities need to be, then that will divide the organization all throughout the course of the year as people are trying to implement.
Yeah. I think one last thing, I mean, there's plenty of other things to say, but I think one other thing that really comes to mind is, what do we care about? To some degree, culture is a definition of what we care about. And, obviously some of that is this, how we care about each other. So when you're around a great culture, you will notice that there's there's kind of a spirit, there's kind of a energy of caring, concern for each other, love, laughter. You can hear it in the stories. You can also just hear it in the laughter and the little things that you might listen to and say, oh, something's going on here that I like.
Yeah.
Right. And you also feel it. So there's this whole element of culture as, leaders trusting their feelings. And the last thing I'd say is listening, really listening. Cultures that have promoted the importance of listening, not interrupting each other, um, leading at every level. Anyone can lead at any level, but that's intentional. That is
Right.
generally not just by default. So if we're going to get intentional, then I guess we're going to shift for a few minutes and talk about, so how do you begin to baseline where you're at?
Yeah.
You want to talk about the GPS?
Sure. Yeah. So thank you. So I often refer to the GPS whenever I'm talking to a business owner, a CEO, a frustrated CEO who's considering embarking on this journey of building a great culture. Um, and I always, so the analogy is that when you use your GPS, in order for it to work, it needs to know two things. It needs to know simply where are you and where do you want to go. And very often, because we just leave the location services on our phone, it knows right away where you are. You've already given it permission to identify where you are. So you may think all I'm doing is I'm putting in where I want to go, but no, you've given it that piece of data. Here's where I am, and then I can enter in this other location. That's where I want to go. And when you put in those 2 points of data, it can map out multiple ways for you to get there, right? It usually maps out the fastest way, right? The most direct way. Lev, I know you'll talk about that in a second. So it can map out the most direct way, the fastest way, but you most of the time have the ability just to click on it and kind of drag the line if you want to potentially take a different route. The point being that your GPS can map out a number of different ways to get from where you are to where you want to go, so long as you've put in those two very important pieces of data. Here's where I am, and here's where I want to go. What it doesn't do, your GPS doesn't laugh at you for where you are. Right? It's a non-judgment. It's an instrument. It doesn't make fun of you for. It doesn't say, "Wow, you're here. Shouldn't you be there? Shouldn't you be a little further along on this journey?" And it doesn't challenge you when you say, "Well, I want to go there." It very matter of factly, non-judgmentally says, "If that's where you are and that's where you want to go, I can help get you there." And so, in essence, that's how I would typically approach the process of getting from where you are as a business owner, as a company, from where you are to where you want to go. Is we need those 2 points of data. We need to know where are you. That's the baseline piece. And talk about that in a moment. But then you need to be able to articulate with some sense of assuredness or commitment, and not that it has to be perfect, but what do you want this to look like? Describe what a highly functioning organization looks like. You tell us about the culture. You map out those two. You get the baseline. You figure out where you want to go, and then just like the GPS, you can probably map out 5, 10 different ways that you can get there. Different ways you can prioritize all the things that you need to accomplish on the journey. I think the important thing to remember, unlike a GPS that maps that where you can get there as quickly as possible, this journey of getting from where you are culturally to where you want to becoming a high performing organization with a great culture, all of those positive things that come from it, it's typically a 3 to 5 year journey. And I often will. That's the baseline. That's the seed that I'll plant with every business owner that I talk to about this. You need to know it's a 3 to 5 year journey to get where you want to go, because I often say you didn't get here overnight. You're not going to get out of this overnight. It takes very often changes to the foundation to the systems and processes, to the sometimes to team members, sometimes to those values and the behaviors that bring that. All of that takes work, and it takes time for it to really root.
Yeah, that's
So when you
great.
think about getting there quickly, so what if I'm listening and I say, yeah, okay, but I want to get there in 6 months, or I want to get there in maybe a year. I'm an overachiever, so I'm going to get there in a year. Tell me why that's problematic.
Well, again, it depends a lot on the size of the organization and many other factors. But in general, what we've learned, kind of 30 years in, is that you can take a good first, you can make good progress in a year. But given that, as an example, we use the Denison Culture Survey as one of the ways to baseline. There's the Gallup employee engagement. There are different tools, but in understanding this analogy with the GPS, you do need to understand where you are, and it may surprise you.
Right.
So you have to be ready and willing and open to the surprises that you may find. And then you can't do it all at once. So let's say, as an example, the vision has faded. Okay. And then maybe on another area, employee engagement is low. Well, there's usually a relationship between vision and employee engagement, right? So your probably number one work there is to cast a vision, get people involved. If you listen to Carmen Bianco and Lorianne Hoffman, who were on one of our recent Frustrated CEO podcasts, you'll recognize how difficult the work was to get to a leadership team that was aligned in a 28,000 person organization on a vision, and how important it was to take it to every level of the organization and really listen to people. But
Right.
once that vision actually caught hold, people started to act differently. They started to interact differently. They started to perform better. And so, let's say that's one important element. And then there are elements around, communication and integration, how we communicate, how we integrate, how handoffs go. And obviously there's the customer or the client, and how are we with mistakes? Are we investing in our people? Is there a pathway for them to grow and maybe become the next leader? And is that an open book? How are we with diversity, equity, and inclusion? All of these things are impacting our culture. So
Right.
yes, you can make a lot of progress in 12 months, but it's probably pretty unrealistic to think I'm going to get that high performing ideal culture that I'm dreaming about, that we've identified in 12 months. It really does look more like a 3 to 5 year journey. And go back to OSU. It's just the fourth year, and their culture has changed.
Yep.
And they're getting, you can see it, you can feel it, you can watch it. But taking it to some of the, look at some of the companies you admire. Take a look. I looked yesterday here in the Pacific Northwest at the large, mid-sized, and small companies that were rated by their people as the best place to work. And the overwhelming theme, they did it differently. Some of them were really innovative, but the overwhelming theme was the way they treated their people. And given that we're all coming out of this, crazy VUCA, pandemic world, and things are still unraveling, you can imagine that maybe that's a place to start. But if you want to do it all at once, it's pretty difficult and probably won't happen.
The example you brought up with Carmen and Lorianne, that casting of the vision and cascading it down to the organization, if I remember correctly, that was like 8 to 10 months worth of work.
Hard work.
Right. Yeah. Right. So I think, while the GPS analogy is easy to understand, when it comes to changing the culture in your organization, it may not necessarily be the best analogy. And maybe a better analogy is think of the culture as the foundation of the home. And if you rush through building the foundation, you get crappy foundation. And then you don't necessarily know that. Sometimes it looks good, but you build the house on top of it. And a year or two in, sometimes not even that long in, and you start to see cracks in the walls. And it's because the foundation isn't holding, the foundation is shifting. And it's very similar in your organization. Think of the culture as the foundation of the business. If the foundation is rotten or unstable, then very often the business can be a house of cards. Look at the stories of companies that looked great on the outside and then folded like a house of cards, and sometimes days, weeks, months. The one that I've been following a lot lately is Blizzard Entertainment, part of Activision Blizzard, right? It's the maker of World of Warcraft and the Diablo series. And they had to the outside, it's an incredibly successful company. Some of the highest revenue generating games of all time, millions and millions of monthly subscribers. So just these incredible cash cows. And Blizzard just recently they lost a lot of their subscribers and was in the news day after day after day because of a bro culture, right? A culture of, where misogyny and drinking that's not necessarily, that's not necessarily how I would build my company, but and that's not a judgment thing. It's just sometimes you play with fire with some of the things that you think might make the people happy, and it really keeps coming back to, as you said earlier, Leb, what's important to us, and how do we treat each other? It's how do we show up every day, individual accountability, and can I come here and be respected and cared about, and do I feel like I can do my best? In preparation for today, we were just looking up some of the statistics, and there, depending upon what you look up, you can find numbers ranging from 50% up to, I saw one that said 90% of employees are 90% of employees say culture is one of the top 3 things that matters to them in terms of deciding where they want to work. Yeah. So it's more than just money, right? It's more than just personal advancement. If it sucks the life out of me to come to work every day, there are other places I can work. Yeah,
more than ever with the remote environment. Which brings me, to another. Maybe for me, a closing statement for this particular episode is that we were doing a session with an organization, and somebody said, you can't build a 3-story house on a 1-story foundation.
Yep.
And so if you think of culture as foundational, as important as everything else, your technology, your financials, your marketing, it is maybe for some kind of a new thought, but it is important to recognize if you have a big vision and you're not intentional about your culture, then how can that cultural foundation grow in the right direction to help you fulfill and build that 3-story house? So I love when he said that. That actually became kind of a cultural language norm in their culture. Whenever they ran into something, they go, "Oh, you can't build a 3-story house on a 1-story foundation."
Yeah.
So, give that some thought, and we'll continue this series and move on to some other important elements that we want to talk to you about.
Yeah. I think that you're right. It's a good place to wrap up. Because I just commend you for showing up for the 40 minutes that you showed up today, because I know you're really under the weather today. So thank you for that. And I'll say, not only is our listener better for that, I'm better for that. You have such experience and wisdom in this area. You've been doing it for, 125 years or something like that.
Hey, Don't give away my age now.
But you have forgotten more than I will ever know. So I'll leave it here, and I'll do a little teaser for future episodes, and then one final thought. So the teaser for future episodes, as we were surprised by the results of that survey. Culture is obviously a passion for us. It was surprising and also pleasantly surprising that it's a passion for you, the listener, for the CEO, and I think your focus is in the right place, because people do have more options now. They can leave, but they're choosing to stay where they feel cared about, and where they like working, and where they know that they can be part of something bigger than themselves. So as we were trying to scope this episode, we realized this is probably a multi-episode series on how to fix dysfunctional culture, even though we're not necessarily going to call it dysfunctional culture, right? So today we thought we'd talk about what is culture, and then where do you start? And so we talked about what it is. We've talked about where do you start. You've got to baseline it. So whatever the right tools are, if you need help, this is what we love. This is what we do for a living. So let us know. You can contact either of us, or any of us. You can reach us through the podcast, or if you don't know this, if you've only found us on the podcast libraries, check us out on LinkedIn. Go into LinkedIn and do a search for The Frustrated CEO, and you will find we have a podcast page. Like and share, or for sure join the page, and then leave comments to let us know, that you need help or topics you want us to cover in future episodes. But bringing it back to the name of the show and the purpose of of this venture is we're trying to address the things that are keeping you awake at night. It may not necessarily be 100% true, but as Leb and I were preparing for this episode, kind of walking through all the symptoms of culture problem. I always say symptoms of a bad culture, symptoms of culture problems, right? Symptoms. How do you know that you have work to do on organization culture? So many of those symptoms are the things that we hear from you and CEOs. It's what's keeping you awake at night. It's unresolved chronic issues in the organization. It's productivity that isn't what you anticipate it to be. It could be waning customer satisfaction scores. It could be lowering revenue, or dropping profitability. It could be cash issues. There's so many ways that culture issues manifest themselves as business problems, because culture is a business. If you think about it, it's not employee satisfaction. It's an important part of your business. And when the culture is not right, a lot of those things that are keeping you awake at night can be addressed, not by putting a Band-Aid on that problem, but by really getting down to the foundation and fixing the foundation, fixing the culture. And then a lot of those chronic things that keep you awake at night will go away. And we've seen it. We've experienced it. We've heard of it. And I'm sure you have too, as a listener. That's why you're here. So, so we're going to try to address some of that in future episodes. We'll also talk about, okay, so I've baselined it. Now what? That probably can be multiple episodes. So more to come for sure. But we at least wanted to tease you, whet the appetite with what is culture and where do I start? And that's kind of what we hope to do today.
It's great. Yeah. And we'll always leave you with some let's get practical. So we'll offer a little bit more in future episodes, but we'll also leave you with a few insights from today.
100%. So that's the last thing I was going to say, because I know you're not feeling well. I'm not going to keep you any longer. Thank you so much for showing up. Listener, thank you for sticking with us to the end. Go back and listen to other episodes, and for sure stay tuned for more on how do you fix dysfunctional culture, even though it's not dysfunctional. But rather than keep you anymore today, we'll just make the Let's Get Practical available on the website like all the other episodes. So listener, go to thefrustratedceo.com for this and every other episode, as well as the Let's Get Practical for this episode. And then, as I said, check out our LinkedIn page. Do a search in LinkedIn for The Frustrated CEO. Make sure you follow that page, where you'll actually you'll get little snippets, video snippets from this and all future conversations as well. I like to think of them as daily CEO vitamins, just a little something, little 1 to 3 minute snippet of something that can reinforce your leadership ability, strengthen and encourage you to face the day. So, Leb, anything else?
No.
For the good cause?
Thank you.
No,
as always, a pleasure.
I'm so glad you showed up, because this is better. We are better together than
together, always.
And we'll be back next time with Patsy and with Leb feeling better, and we'll cover more on The Frustrated CEO. See you next time.